Christmas is often seen as a season and a time of connection and family and belonging, just like you see and hear in songs and movies. But for some of us, I think it can actually highlight the opposite. That for some of us, when we get to this season, it can actually highlight sadness and loneliness. And while many of us, whether you're in the room or online, look forward to gathering, others can feel the weight of being left out or alone. And I wonder if you've ever been there. Maybe not this Christmas, but maybe there was a Christmas where you felt like, I don't know who I'm gonna experience this season with. I don't know who or if I have anyone to share this season with. And so how do we make this season a season of hope for everyone, not just a few? If you're taking notes, the title of our message today is You Belong Here. You belong here. I oftentimes ask people, when you get good news, who's the person you're gonna call first? Who's the person you wanna share that news with? And oftentimes, that response is maybe somewhat more emotional than the good news itself. And I've always found that interesting. I remember being 22 years old, and I was working at a church in Atlanta and had my first real job, and was super excited, and in that process have been doing a lot of songwriting for the church that I was working at, and trying to get into that world. And so I remember when you're trying to get into that world, I would say over the course of a year, probably was trying to write at least 150 songs over the course of a year. And so spent a lot of time doing it, and I remember getting a phone call. And it was the first time that a publisher called me and said, hey, this artist is picking up your song and they want to use it for a project. And I remember hearing that news, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And I knew the very first person that I was gonna call was gonna be my best friend, Jonathan. And the reason he was gonna be the first person that I called is because he would understand how big that moment was. And that's what we do, right? When we get good news, we call people who we know like us, care about us, and are gonna understand how significant and how big that moment is. And the reason Jonathan knew that that moment was a big deal is because we spent hours and hours and hours and hours writing together. And I'll never forget Jonathan. I called Jonathan, I'm like, hey man, you're not gonna believe this. A song got picked up, and he's like, who's the artist? And I told him the artist, and he's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna be rich. And then I reminded him, I was like, no, it's Christian music. I'm not gonna be rich. And so he was just so excited because he understood how much work we had been doing and putting into it, just trying to get one, right? And so I'll never forget it. And then the crazier part is we don't know, you don't really know when the project is gonna come out. You don't know if you're gonna hear it or whatnot. And I remember being in Florida, visiting a friend, and I walked into a church, and I'm at a service. I'm just sitting in a service like you are right now, and I hear them start a song. I'm like, man, that sounds just like that song. And then they start singing it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is whoa. And so then after the service, I called Jonathan. I'm like, Jonathan, you're not gonna believe this. I was at church, just going to church. They sang the song. I was like, this is crazy. And Jonathan says, no, you're gonna be rich. It's like, Jonathan, I'm not gonna be rich. Let me tell you, Jonathan, I seen the royalty check. It's like 10 cents, not a lot. And but I think we all have these moments, right, where we get good news and we know exactly who we're gonna call. And who you share that good news with first, I think it tells us a lot about what matters and who matters. And I think you could have people that you call with different types of good news, right? I have a text thread with a couple friends, Tess and I, and our text thread, the news that we share with each other is if we see someone famous. That's our whole text thread. And so I was out in Silver Lake last night, and I was walking down the street. I was trying to finish Christmas shopping, and I walked by this woman who looked familiar, and I was like, man, she looks familiar. I'm like, where do I know her from? And so I keep walking, and I go back the other way, and she comes back the other way, and I'm like, man, where do I know her from? And then it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Olivia Wilde. And so immediately pull out my phone, just saw Olivia Wilde. That's all our text thread is just saw this person. And my favorite part is we now respond with like, oh, that's a good one. Like there's levels now, right? There's like levels. It's okay. Who really cares, right? The best part is when someone thinks they saw someone and they text it and we get really excited because we're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then they have to like send the correction of like, yeah, never mind, it wasn't them. It just looked like them, right? But I think what's interesting about us as humans is when we can't or don't share our experiences with someone we care about, those experiences are somehow diminished. It's almost as if they aren't real. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. Sometimes there are parts of our story that don't feel real until we share them with someone else. And I wonder if that's why this season feels so hard for some of us. That you're not sure who to share with, or maybe the person you used to share with is no longer in your life. This can bring up an intriguing question when it comes to the Christmas story. See, when Jesus was born, God coming to earth to save the world, the biggest news in history, God was intentional about who he told that news first to. And his choice, when you think about it, is surprising. He shared it with a group of nameless shepherds. And so if God does nothing by accident, what does that choice reveal? Let's read what happened. Look at Luke 2, 8-9. This is what it says. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified. And I know sometimes these stories that we read or hear from the Bible can be hard for us to picture, but if you grew up in church, if you've been to Sunday school, you probably have this image in your head of shepherds around a baby, and the picture that we're given is one where they're smiling and they look happy, obviously because there was a baby that was just born, but the Bible tells us that the shepherds were terrified. I wonder why they were terrified. See, ancient Jews believed that if you saw God or you saw an angel, that it meant certain death. They believed that if you saw the divine, that it meant that your life was coming to an end. And so the shepherd's first response is, well, this is the end. The angel has come to tell us that our life is over, because that's what they believed. But that's not what happens at all. Look at what verses 10-12 say. It says, but the angel reassured them, don't be afraid. He said, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord is born today in Bethlehem, the city of David, and you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger. And jump to verse 16. It says, they hurried to the village and found Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in the manger. And so the shepherds go to find the baby that the angels announced, and I think we picture them huddled around Jesus, and I think we have this image that there were other people there, but in reality, it was just the shepherds. It was the shepherds and Mary and Joseph and the baby. The wise men showed up much later. And at the time, no one would have imagined that Jesus' birth would have looked like this. No one would have thought that the only people, the first people outside of his parents that would be in that room huddled around him would be shepherds. See, many scholars believe that city shepherds were often criminals serving out a sentence. They were pulled from their communities, living in isolation, watching sheep as punishment for something shameful. And so shepherds were stigmatized for life. If you were a shepherd, people thought that, man, you aren't a good person. That there was a stereotype. If you were a shepherd, you clearly have done something wrong. And that's what people believed. Everywhere they went, they smelled like sheep, which was a scent of shame in that context. And in town, people pulled their kids close. They hid valuables and eyed them with judgment. They were allowed but unwanted and mostly stayed away. And so the open fields that they worked ultimately became their prison. Shunning those who don't toe the line was and still is one of the most painful punishments that someone can endure. And that was the experience of shepherds. And not much has changed It's still one of the most hurtful things that could happen to someone. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. Nothing stings more than realizing you weren't invited, included, or wanted. Nothing stings more than realizing you weren't invited, included, or wanted. And that was the experience for shepherds. They were never invited, they were never included, and no one wanted to be near them. And I wonder if you've ever felt like you were on the outside looking in. Or maybe you were once on the inside of a friend group, a team, a relationship, or a family, and then maybe you were pushed out. Jonathan, that same friend I talked about earlier, told me the story about his son, that at school his son had drew a picture of his family, and he brought it home. And Jonathan's son was showing his dad the picture and was walking him through everyone. He said, there's mom, there's my big sister, there's me, and that was it. He forgot to draw his dad. And Jonathan was shocked. He was like, wait, like, what does that mean? Right? Does it mean that I'm not around enough? Does it mean that he doesn't think I'm worth being in the picture? Was it a mistake? And I think that's what we say when someone's not in our lives anymore. They're not in the picture. And I wonder if you've ever felt removed from a picture, like you don't belong. Like maybe people can see your rejection or your shame or where you've been, what you've done, or your worst failure, because that's exactly what it was like to be a shepherd. They sat outside the community they've been shunned from, staring at lanterns in the village below, watching others' happiness from a distance. And some of you may know that feeling. Maybe not every night, but it surfaces, especially around Christmas, because holidays tend to mark time for us, right? Maybe for you, this is the first Christmas since you lost a parent. Maybe this is the year that you lost the house or the thing that was close to you. Maybe this is your third holiday since the divorce. And if this feels familiar, you know what it was like to be a shepherd that first Christmas. I imagine them telling stories, humming songs, and whispering promises that were passed down through generations, clinging to the little tiniest bit of hope that they have when things feel hopeless. And maybe they got stuck on a familiar couple of verses of the Bible, like the words of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 61, 1-2, it says this: the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of the Lord's favor has come, and with it, the day of God's anger against their enemies. I could imagine for those shepherds, good news, comfort, and freedom were words that maybe they kept repeating just to keep themselves going. They were poor, they were brokenhearted, they were captive, mourning all that they had lost, what was gone and what would never be. And I wonder if you've ever looked at your life and said, you know what, things are pretty bad right now, and I just don't believe they're gonna get any better. Because that's what hopelessness is. That regardless of who you have around you, regardless of what might be changing or shifting, you can't see what's in front of you and think that things are gonna get better or things are gonna ever look different. Right? This isn't how you imagine your story, and it feels unfixable, like something about you is broken, cursed, or unworthy. And for the shepherds, this is where everything starts to shift. The sky breaks open, angels appear, and the message is clear that for these shepherds who had gone most of their life not getting invited, not being included, not being wanted, the angels appear. And there is a reminder for them that there is a God who has not forgotten you. And all of a sudden, things start to look a little bit different. Could you imagine being a shepherd and realizing that you are the very first to hear about this news? That you've gone your whole life, most of your life, being the one left out, and now you're the first to know. For the first time, they were invited not out of obligation or pity, but because God wanted them there. And so, of course, the shepherds ran as fast as they could to see the baby. They were the first, he told, with a front row seat reserved for them. We can't picture the nativity without the shepherds now, but before this, no one would have even put them in the scene. But God did, because that's who he is. And if you're taking notes, here's our big idea today. God goes to great lengths to invite all those others intentionally leave out. God goes to great lengths to invite all those others intentionally leave out. And then he invites his followers to do the same. And that was the shepherd's first impulse. And that's the beauty of hope, is when you truly experience hope, you realize that it's never just for us, but it expands and recruits us to share it. The shepherds who were once excluded, they didn't hoard the good news. They didn't hold on to it. They didn't keep it to themselves. They invited everyone in, even those who had shut them out. And what's interesting to me is that while they never be the same, their situation didn't really change all that much. Look at what verse 20 says. It says the shepherds went back to their flocks. So they went back to doing what they were doing, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen. It was just as the angel had told them. And so they were filled with hope, believing Isaiah's prophecy was coming true, that everything would be different, yet they returned to the exact same life. And I think when we encounter God, we often expect him to remove us from difficult circumstances or difficult situations, but sometimes instead of removing us from the situation, what Jesus does is he just gives us hope for it. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. Receiving hope doesn't always mean your immediate situation won't be the same. It means that you won't be the same. God never says, hey, I'm gonna fill that situation with hope. No. He says, I wanna fill you with hope. And so your situation may not change, but man, you can be changed, and how you enter that situation, how you look at that situation, how you handle that situation can look different. Because you have been filled with hope. Because hope is a conviction that things won't always be as they are. It's an insistence that something better is possible and already in motion. It's a refusal to let disappointment dictate your destiny. It's a deep understanding that God stands with the poor, brokenhearted, and mourning. It's a belief that when I trust God is with and for me, I can experience heaven's beauty breaking into whatever struggle I'm facing right now. Hope is the realization that no one has to be left out because God invites everyone in. Like the shepherds, our response should be to share that hope with others, bringing those who are out of the picture back in. And so what if we thought about it like this, that Christmas is an invitation for us to redraw the picture? When my friend's son saw his disappointment about his dad being left out of the picture, the family picture that he drew, he redrew it immediately to include his dad. And I wonder this season, who do you need to add to your life's picture? Who is the world left out that God is prompting you to invite in? At South Hills, one of our core values is that we want to reflect the diversity of our community, making it clear to everyone, even if you don't belong anywhere else, you can belong here. Because God's love is good news for all people, and when we live this way, we extend the true spirit of Christmas, not just for a month, but all year long. And I wonder if we chose to take this message of hope seriously, recognizing that we do have good news to share, I wonder who it could impact. I wonder whose life could be changed. And so a question for you to think about this week as we look ahead to Christmas is, how can you extend the hope of the message of Christmas to someone in your life this week? How could you share this good news that you've heard with someone in your life this week? To remind them that in the kingdom of God, they're invited, they're included, and they're wanted. Because that's what this hope is all about.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.